The scene. A sultry September Saturday. Two sly sons of the South slinging soliloquies on a slew of stories, some silly, some serious, seldom slipping our schedule or stooping to slander or sophistry, but subtly shooting to shift the script and slake the striving for superior, sober sifting through Scrivener's scribblings, sordid and sacred in similar scope. So sit satisfied as we sarcastically sort the salient from the subpar 6 ways from Sunday, for it is on Spotify and sundry other streaming services that you subscribe to the Socialist Shelf.
Joss, I hate to break it to you, it's not September or Saturday.
Shit.
Welcome to the Socialist Shelf, home of, let's say this week, alliteration, right? It's an alliterative episode, and I would like everyone to know that Joss pulled that off in one take. I said, hey, if I need to cup it together, feel free to, stop. And he said, no, I'll do it in one take, and he did it in one take. Very well done, Joss.
That's my monologue chops for the year. You got nothing more out of me.
Fantastically done. Fantastically done. Well, if you didn't guess, today we're talking about V for Vendetta. We are spreading our wings to graphic novels. We spread our wings to self-help books slash manifestos with the Rich DeVos episodes, and now the graphic novels. Really, the barn door is open, and who knows what will come out. Certainly not Animal Farm, but anything else through the barn door could come.
I wonder if perhaps you might call this book a manifesto.
It's close in a way, but he has a book that is just straight up his manifesto later, but he wrote in 2016, and that's
Hmm.
Jerusalem, and it's pretty damn good. But this was like the manifesto of definitely 80s Alan Moore. And yes, the main guy we're talking about here is Alan Moore. V for Vendetta, written by Alan Moore, considered by many to be just like the greatest comic creator of all time. He's up there with some of the greats, no doubt, though he actually does a lot more writing of comics than he does drawing. His drawing is decent. I mean, obviously better than anything I can do, but he's not one of the great artists when it comes to drawing, but he has a great vision for what comics should look like. He does action very well. He has a
Mhm.
distinct style that he can mess with. He's a very good writer, and can he work? Because the dude just has put out so much through his life, and we will get into that. But I want to give credit where credit is due. There were other people who worked on this that we will not really be talking about very much, but David Lloyd, Tony Ware, Steve Craddock, Steve Whitaker, uh, Shaban Dobbs. David Lloyd again is listed as colorist. Des Skin, Karen Berger, and Scott Nabakin. These people worked as artists, colorists, letterers, and editors. But as writer, Moore is the sole credited writer of this work, which is actually kind of irregular because it was serialized. And at the time, typically a serialized comic would be written by multiple writers, but this was his baby. So
Mhm.
we're really going to be talking about Alan Moore here as our main guy, and also because, wow, is he interesting? That might be an understatement, actually.
Well, he's a wizard.
Literally, he's a wizard. That's like not a joke. I have in his biography when he came out as a practicing wizard,
Hmm.
which is post V for Vendetta, though he began practicing
Or magician might
earlier.
perhaps be the more proper title.
He's pretty flexible. Look up a picture of Alan Moore. We'll probably have one as the episode art. But if not, look up a picture of Alan Moore. He's emo Gandalf. He is Dumbledore from My Immortal, presumably. Is except he's not a prep. He's not a poser. My man is the real deal,
Mhm.
no doubt. Ebony Darkness Dementia Ravenway would approve.
She herself probably wouldn't read one of these, though.
You know, probably not. Probably not. The fan fiction of V for Vendetta in that style, I'm not really even sure what it would look like. But that's for another podcast to posit,
It would
I think.
lean really heavily into the references. It would be very, very Reddit like, and you can see shades of you can see shades of that sort of thing in elsewhere in fan fiction. The references to songs and to theater and to literature without necessarily the context that V for Vendetta offers.
V for
You know,
Vendetta, having read it crossover is something that I can't even conceive of that. No, it is beloved by many an epic poster.
I
But
myself, dressed up as fucking V in on Halloween in high school.
and why shouldn't you? Because he kicks ass. But
Mm.
we will get into it. If you know about V for Vendetta and haven't actually read it or seen the movie, you probably know it from the iconic Guy Fawkes mask, which of course is not made up by V for Vendetta, but massively popularized by it. And the aesthetic of the guy in the black cloak, the black hat, the V for Vendetta mask, people call it, the Guy Fawkes mask, is huge. Guy Fawkes, of course, being a member of the provincial English Catholics and failed in the gunpowder plot of 1605 to blow up the Houses of Parliament. And for some reason, the British are like big fans of the guy. It's like a self-hating thing. I never quite understood it. Joss, any insight onto why the British love this guy so much?
I mean, there's a sort of self-deprecation about it, right? Like I mean, of course they burn him in effigy every 5th of November, but there's also the sense that yeah, the danger has passed, there's no more Catholic plot to blow up the Palace of Westminster, and now he can be used as shorthand for down with this sort of thing, right? For
Mhm.
a general struggle against authority. Anonymous, of course, the CIA front that pretends to be a hacker collective, uses his image.
Yeah, the Guy Fawkes mask, like literally, if you look it up on Wikipedia, it says Guy Fawkes mask, also known as V for Vendetta mask, right?
Hmm.
The idea of the Guy Fawkes mask was popularized by this. David Lloyd drew this design. Um, it is a very interesting thing, and it has been used in other media and stuff. Obviously, you talk about Anonymous, it was used in the Occupy movement.
Hmm.
Mr. Robot, the show, they wear Guy Fawkes masks in the F Society. Um, it's a big, there's obviously the meme of the guys like, you can't even understand the depths of my mind, and he's got vape smoke blowing from underneath the Anonymous slash Guy Fawkes slash V for Vendetta mask. um it itself is like become enough of a cursed meme that like reading this graphic novel, there are moments where like you chuckle, which I think
Hmm. Hmm.
Alan Moore would be fine with, because Alan Moore knows that V is a ridiculous character. I don't
Yes.
want to get too far ahead of ourselves. He kills a guy with a banana peel at one point. And let's just say this up front. We're going to disagree with a lot of ideology here. This book kicks ass, though.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't want anything I say to detract from this kicks ass, and I think Alan Moore kicks ass.
Hmm.
So before we get into Alan Moore, Joss, do you have any more thoughts on just like the mythos of V for Vendetta? Because for me, I'll talk a little bit more about the movie later, my relationship to it, but
Hmm.
mostly, that's mostly what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the mythos is really the movie versus the book at this stage,
Yeah,
and the Wachowskis, of course, were quite taken with it. The makers of the Matrix and Speed Racer and all that. But as Moore
justice for
himself,
them, by the way.
yes, yes,
That's a whole different conversation, but
it
yeah.
is a whole different conversation, and as Moore himself will say, "Oh, they butchered. Look what they did to my boy," right? But there's elements of the film that I like.
Hmm.
Um, it's. I still go back and watch it every now and again. It's fun. It's not necessarily a political project. It's kind of, the film is your bog standard, rising up against authority. And I think there's a little something there that's missing from the book that I encourage everybody to look at.
Hugo Weaving
Um,
as V, though, is a great casting choice. He does the
Indispensable,
voice.
fucking
Like you
indispensable.
can't
Hugo
like
Weaving
hear
and
it in it.
Hugo Weaving and John Hurt as the Chancellor
Oh, no
character.
doubt, no
Hmm.
doubt.
Hmm.
I mean, and it's got great moments. I think my
Brilliantly
favorite,
cast.
we'll get to my favorite scene in the book, but my favorite scene in the book is the Valerie scene, and it's, I think, done almost perfectly in the movie.
In the film, yes, yeah, it's
Mm.
pitch perfect,
Mhm.
and yeah, that's the thing. It's a really stirring story as a political project. The film, not at all. The book, we have our issues with it. But
Let's hear about the guy behind the book, Alan Moore. Born in 1953, an
he is
English author.
69 years old. Nice.
Yes, 69 years old. Very nice, very nice. Um, Legendary comic book writer from Northampton, The Burrows, which, if you don't know The Burrows, you haven't read the book Jerusalem because it probably says The Burrows in the book Jerusalem 10,000 times, which is his 2016 book that I refer to as basically his manifesto. Very interesting, mostly about class and the nature of space-time.
Hmm.
Um,
I
but
admit, I admit,
nevertheless,
I haven't read a 1,000+ page book in quite a while.
it's
But
so long, dude.
that'll be my next one.
His father was a brewery worker. His mother was a printer, and he read like crazy. He described his reading style as carnivorous.
Hmm.
This has included comic books. He was a big fan of The Flash and other superheroes, as well as just whatever he could get his hands on. Notably, literacy rates in his area very, very low.
Hmm.
Even like by poor area standards. So he felt defined by his relationship to the written word in a way that maybe even, your normal bookworm child wouldn't. Because it's not just that you're a bookworm child in a largely illiterate section of town. And some theorize, though I don't know if it's been stated anywhere, that this is part of why he has a love of comics, because there is a bridging of the gap for
Yes.
even illiterate people.
I
Despite
think
his,
indeed,
yeah,
like you could read V for Vendetta without the dialogue and
yeah,
piece it together.
you could get a
100%.
lot. You could get a lot of it. You could get a
Hmm.
lot of it. Despite that, he wasn't a very good student. He found it to be too rigid and ordered. He was really into poetry, fanzines, and LSD, the last of which got him kicked out of school at age 16. And his headmaster went around and told all schools for miles, do not let this kid in. He will cause problems, which Alan Moore has written. Yeah, I probably would have. Alan
This
Moore
kid
def
dropped acid one time. Like,
yeah.
don't admit him.
Well, he was selling LSD as well.
Yeah,
He describes
he
himself
can't have
as
been the only
the
one.
no, not at all. He describes himself as the worst LSD salesman of all time, just openly being like, "You want to get some," and like using like just a magic word,
How do you
and
do, fellow
everyone knew it.
kids? But he was
Yeah,
actually a kid.
but he was actually a kid. Yes, but people always described him as an old soul. People thought he was older than he was, even as a young man. Um, he worked odd jobs and lived at home. Janitor, tanner, just did what he could. He married Phyllis Dixon, also known as Phyllis Moore, in 1973, and at this point became a subcontractor for a gas company and just wanted to die. He just
Mhm.
hated the work, hated the office work. He decided to just drop out of the job and live on cheap commissions and unemployment benefits. And he just was like, I'll just die before I keep doing this.
That's a mood.
Um, yeah. He got started in comics around this time, writing a parody of Paddington Bear called Anon E. Mouse.
Hmm.
Um, and then worked with Steve Moore, no relation, but would write the novelization for V for Vendetta later on, notably. Um, though Steve Moore had nothing to do with the project. He also would work on Marvel Comics, Warrior Comics, etc. And he worked with him on the Axel Press Button Cyborg comics. Now, just so you know, I am not going to list every comic that Alan Moore has had an association with or has been involved with. That would take way too
It would be the
long.
whole episode.
Yeah, that'd be the whole episode. He has so many little projects: Press Button, Roscoe Moscow, The Stars My Degradation, Maxwell the Magic Cat, all of these within that just span right there. Notably, that last one he loved and was actually making money on, and he dropped because the paper wrote a negative piece on homosexuals. This is in the early 80s, and that is not a popular position in the late 70s, early 80s
Hmm.
in Britain. Margaret Thatcher is about to be elected. This is not a time where that is popular. This is a principled guy. Um, he became more interested in writing than drawing in this period, basically liking to do sketches and having what he described as more talented artists do stuff afterwards. He had an eye for action, like how to draw the scenes and what they should look like, but he felt that the actual details were not his strong suit. He submitted to Judge Dredd to try and write for Judge Dredd. And the company was like, we don't need help. We've got a team writing Judge Dredd, and it's huge. But the writer, Alan Grant, said, and this is an exact quote, wait, this guy is a really fucking good writer, end quote. That is a direct quote. And got him some work. He also got him some work there and got him some work working on Doctor Who Weekly as well. So you get into the 80s and he starts picking up regular work through his connection with Alan Grant. He starts working for Marvel and he wrote 50 or so comics with them,
Hmm.
especially with the Future Shocks. He wrote a lot of short stories for them. He worked on a series called Skiz, which was a self-conscious knockoff of E.T. and helped run DR and Quench in 1983, which he described as Dennis the Menace with thermonuclear power. He worked on the Ballad of Halo Jones, Captain Britain, Star Wars comics, anyone who would take him. In 1982, the first issue of V for Vendetta is published in the comic Warrior, and it is his first big boy hit. Warrior is actually a comic sort of publication that would fizzle out after a few issues. Notably, he also publishes his first issue of Miracle Man in Warrior. So more Warrior issue 1 has Miracle Man and V for Vendetta in it, and a few other comics that are lost to history. It does not last very long at all,
Man.
despite having these two super iconic comics being in them. And it is notable the dichotomy between Miracle Man and V for Vendetta. V for Vendetta is about the destruction of a fascist government. Miracle Man is about a superhero who sets up a fascist government.
So kind of a pre-Watchmen.
It's pre-Watchmen and it is just straight up Homelander. Like he's the
Hmm.
character of Homelander. But it is him definitely laying the seeds that will become Watchmen. V for Vendetta was originally published in black and white, and was published from 1982 to 1985. And then
Really?
Warrior was canceled and they didn't finish it. The last 3 chapters were
Hmm.
not released. And yeah, that drove some people insane. Um, it would not be released, the final version with the last few chapters, for another 3 years till DC
Wow.
Comics with Vertigo picked it up and they colorized it at this time. Um, so
Which makes it all the more
yeah,
interesting because there's one or two characters, particularly early on, who remain totally black and white.
yeah.
I'm thinking of Hayer's wife.
Mhm. Not to mention V himself.
Yes. Well, of
Um,
course, yes, with a blush.
mhm.
I don't know what to make of
Yeah,
it, but we'll get into it.
yeah, absolutely. Um, he also got into music in this period. Not really that important, except the I'm only noting it because he called his band the Sinister Ducks, and I thought that was awesome. He started working with DC Comics shortly after, where he wrote Swamp Thing, which is a huge deal, and helped launch the career of noted artists such as Neil Gaiman, or Gaiman. I never know. Neil Gamer, Neil Gaiman. I don't know. Whatever it is. Um, he wrote some introspective Superman. He didn't really want to do it, so he just wrote What Happened to Man of Tomorrow, which is like an iconic Superman thing, but he was like kind of like an anti-superhero guy.
Hmm.
Um, but this launched more to genuine fame, especially when he wrote Watchmen in 1986. Um, and he despised fame. I mean, he just hated it. He hated going to cons. He does not go to these things. He says after once being hounded into a bathroom for an autograph, he just couldn't do it anymore. He does not like it. He's a very solitary, anxious person. He does give interviews and he is apparently very gracious with fans, but he cannot go in places where he's just surrounded by people. It
No.
freaks him the
No.
hell
Yeah.
out. Um, um,
Yeah, you have to take that kind of thing on your own terms.
Yeah. 1988, he wrote The Killing Joke, which is often called the best Batman comic of all time. And then he broke with DC almost immediately after this because they did not pay him anything. He got less than 2% of the revenue from Watchmen. Less
Wow.
than 2% from Watchmen. They promised him rights after the publication was done, but then they basically found ways to keep them technically in publication. So these rights never went back to him, allowing DC to make the Watchmen film and other such things, which absolutely drove more insane. Uh,
Mm, that's
he
fucked.
He left in 1989. Basically, the second V for Vendetta was over because he wanted that thing to be out because he did love V for Vendetta. Um, Again, there's a lot more to say, so I'll try and move fast. He started Mad Love Comics with his wife and their threesome partner slash mutual lover, Deborah Delano, in the early 90s. And he tried to move away from superheroes, and he used these issues to promote homosexuality and donated all proceeds to gay and lesbian charities. And my notes say he wrote other stuff. Honestly, this would take too long. In this time, he also wrote From Hell, a fictionalized account of Jack the Ripper, a 10-year project that ran until 1998. That's another one of his big ones. He also worked on Lost Girls in this period, a comic about grown-up fairy tale characters having sex. And
I could do.
yeah, as one does.
There's a lot
Uh,
of that in adult comics.
yeah. In this period, his wife left him and took his two daughters and their mutual lover. So that was an L. Um, he lost them both. The wife ran off with the threesome partner. You know, and yeah, he then in 1993 basically was like, fuck it, I'm coming out as a magician. And people were like, what? And he was like, you heard me. And this is also the period he says he wrote his worst work. Interestingly enough, man was going through a divorce and losing his children, and also losing a partner that was clearly something to him. Understandable that this was like a weird time for him.
Mhm.
Um, but he returned to DC a little later. And notably, sorry, on Lost Girls, he worked with a woman named Melinda Gebbie. He would marry her in 2007. So,
Yes.
there's something. They bonded over something, getting horny over Peter Pan or whatever.
That's
Um,
a brilliant foundation for a relationship.
it's true.
Not even joking.
Slow burn, too. He returned to DC in 1999 when they said they would let him do anything, and it gave him his own imprint and not touch his work. ABC Comics, where he made The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Promethea, and Tom Strong. Shocker, he feuded with DC again. They tried to control his work, and he left.
Hmm.
In 2005, Moore spoke deeply about hating the comics industry, and he got into more niche stuff. He wrote a long essay on porn in 2006 with his release of the Lost Girl collection, which became his book, 25,000 Years of Erotic Freedom. Um, he
Wow.
became a regular on the Infinite Monkey Cage radio drama in 2009, and he gives interviews there still. He regularly returns there to basically hash out his theories. A bunch more little projects in short magazines such as Alan Moore's Yuggoth Cultures and Other Growths. And in 2016, he wrote his trilogy of
Hmm.
books that is really one book, Jerusalem, and he basically sees that as like his magnum opus.
Hmm.
And having read it, I see why he says that. It's also a book that's hard to recommend to people because it's very meandering. He retired from comics in 2016 and then proceeded to write a bunch more comics for the next 3 years. But then in 2019, he seems to have actually retired. He is presently working on a textbook of magic with a to be determined release date. And he says that's the project that consumes most of his time. And he wants to release the textbook of magic to teach you how to do magic. Um, I wrote, it's almost silly to call him successful. He is the most successful comic author of all time. Watchmen is the only comic to make it onto Time's 100's best novel lists. Um, it's like his list of awards is its own page. It's just not. He's successful beyond all imagining. Which is interesting that he's also such a weird little guy because he said he once wrote in a comic, the one place the gods inarguably exist is the human mind. And then he said, oh shit, that's true. And became a practicer of magic. He believes in the concept of idea space, where he says we have our own ideas that are houses, but they are on shared streets. He says big ideas are continents on which these streets rest. He says big ideas, like, Marxism and Christianity, which he puts on the same level, which is
He
an
originated
interesting.
the character of John Constantine,
Yes.
as well as the sort of legend that's passed down
Yeah, and
among his
Swamp Thing. Yeah.
illustrators. To the people who have drawn written for John Constantine claim to have met the character.
Yes. His primary deity is the Roman snake god Glycon, and he
Let's
carries
go.
around a serpent staff to represent it. Um, What else is there to say, man? He's refused his name to appear on film adaptations or to get money from them as because he's mad they exist. Some of them insist on using his name anyway, and they are legally obligated to give him money, in which he demands they donate them to Black Lives Matter or similar organizations. Um,
Famously, there was somebody who lied on him when V for Vendetta was coming out. Some
yeah,
producer who was like, "Yeah, Alan Moore is all for this," and he's like, "Fuck
he
you, no,
was
I'm not."
pissed. Yeah.
Hmm.
He basically called the movie, he said that it was like a lazy, like trying to do American Bush era politics commentary in Britain, and he said, "Stop being lazy. Use your own country as the backdrop."
Hmm.
Um, he's interestingly, he's lost. People have estimated it's in the millions the amount of money he's forfeited on these film adaptations. He's called superhero movies as a whole, not just his, but all of them, a blight on cinema and culture for man children. Um, and he says that they seem to be a pretext for fascism, basically saying the fact that so many grown people, their entire obsession is with superhero films, is this idea of like this, like he says he feels like it's a denigration of the mind, and he says he feels partially to blame for making Watchmen, which was the superheroes for adults thing. I would push back on that, but guy's gonna blame himself for things. Um, Finally, my man is an anarchist. He believes, and he says this himself, all states arise out of a natural state of anarchy. It is the foundation of all systems, from communism to capitalism to feudalism. As such, he strongly supported Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, and the only time he says he's voted was for Jeremy Corbyn, um, because he just said he felt like he really needed to.
Hey,
Um,
you could do a lot worse
yeah, he's viciously criticized Frank Miller, calling him a misogynist and a homophobe.
because
I
he
actually,
is.
yes, I actually like this quote by him, so I'm going to include it. Because Frank Miller criticized Occupy, and he said the Occupy and Moore said, "quote The Occupy movement is a completely justified howl of moral outrage, and it seems to be handled in a very intelligent, nonviolent way, which is probably another reason why Frank Miller would be less than pleased with it. I'm sure if it had been a bunch of young sociopathic vigilantes with Batman makeup on their faces, he'd be more in favor of it." End quote. He also says, and this is a description of his theory of anarchy, quote, I believe that all other political states are in fact variations or outgrowths of a basic state of anarchy. After all, when you mention the idea of anarchy to most people, they will tell you what a bad idea it is because the biggest gang would just take over, which is pretty much how I see contemporary society. We live in a badly developed anarchist situation in which the biggest gang has taken over and have declared that it is not an anarchist situation, that it is a capitalist or a communist situation. But I tend to think that anarchy is the most natural form of politics for a human being to actually practice, end quote. And in his conception of anarchy, he's taking that word very literally, like the
Hmm.
anarchy, as in without rulers. Um,
Yes,
he is
yes,
very strengthens.
not without order, notably, as
Yes.
V himself points out. But yeah, without leaders.
And he feels very strongly about that there would still be organized stuff in an anarchist society, but there
Mhm.
just cannot be rulers. Um, he's wrong about certain things, I think, but that is his perspective. The last thing I'll note is he said in an interview very recently, they asked him, well, what do we need to do about capitalism? And he said, I wish the solution was to behead the bankers, but unfortunately we'll have to do something less interesting, like beheading financial capital as an entity and seizing
Yes.
assets.
Hmm.
And he says, though he thinks the other thing would be much more gratifying.
Yeah, critical support.
Oh man. And that was a while. That's a lot of my voice, but that is a crash course in the just wild figure of Alan Moore.
Yeah, yeah,
Thoughts, Joss?
definitely. Yeah, no, definitely. He's a towering figure. He's a frequently misunderstood one, and he's one that, again, gateway to a lot of really intriguing political
Hmm.
moments and strains. Thatcherite Britain, I admit I don't have a whole lot of experience with, but to an
Seems bad.
experience, yeah, an experience that produced this, right? It's I mean, as bad as Bush era United States was, this is, I mean,
Notably, though, he did conceive this pre-Thatcher.
yes.
Um, but it is definitely informed by Thatcher and
Oh
like
yeah, and
that
he
that
saw the way the wind was blowing, certainly.
hell, it
As
says "Make Britain Great Again" is a line on the first page.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, that's and indeed, before Donald Trump used that, make America great again, Reagan did. Let's make America great again, and
Yeah.
he very correctly called the era of reaction
Hmm.
that began sort of in the late 70s through the 80s and is only, I think, starting to be rolled back.
Yes, 100%.
Hmm.
Um, and he writes a interesting the version I have the cover is he says, and I won't read the whole thing, but he says, I began V for Vendetta in the summer of 1981 during a working holiday upon the Isle of Wight. My youngest daughter Amber was a few months old. I finished it in the late winter of 1988 after a gap of publishing of nearly 5 years from the discontinuation of England's Warrior magazine, its initial home. Amber is now 7. I don't know why I mentioned that. It's just one of those unremarkable facts that strike you suddenly with unexpected force, so that you have to go and sit down.
Mhm.
And then there's a moment he says a little later in the quote, and I like this. Naivete can also be detected in my supposition that it would take something as melodramatic as a near-miss nuclear conflict to nudge England towards fascism. Um, because yeah, he goes on to note Margaret Thatcher is now entering her third term. He's writing this in
Mhm.
1988, and talking about unbroken conservative leadership. They're talking about, you know, concentration camp for people with AIDS. He says the new riot police wear black visors, as do their horses. The vans have rotating video cameras on top, and the government has expressed a desire to eradicate homosexuality, even as an abstract concept. Now, fortunately, it didn't quite get as bad as V for Vendetta did due to the active fight back of the organized and disorganized, I suppose, to give credit to some independent activists. Left, there was actual resistance
Mhm.
um, to this. Moore is putting out a call actively for resistance, and can be credited with some of the riots that took place in the 90s against some of this stuff, I think. Um, so yeah, but yeah, notable that he's writing it in this place, and that pause allows him to feel like he's experiencing the beginning of this society.
Yes, yes, and as reactionary as an era as we're still living in, it's not the England shown in V for Vendetta.
Hmm.
The England shown in V for Vendetta, and this is perhaps where we can get into the plot, is one where such forces, organized and disorganized, have been lost. They have been completely burned out. Um, it is 1997. It is 1997.
Year I
Uh,
was born, baby.
oh, that's right. That's right.
Woohoo.
1997. 511, never forget.
So true.
Um, and so it starts our first page. I mean, the first panel, you have a sort of Dutch angle here. It's tilted and it immediately unsettles you. We're in the middle of the night. November 5th, 1997, in a fascist Britain.
Yes. And the art style off the bat is it's playing with shadows in a very interesting way. The whole thing is. Um and it's designed to sort of, I don't know, everything is very I'm not good at talking about art. I'm gonna be honest. This is not my forte.
Go
So,
on.
this is kind of outside. We tried to get an artist on this episode. But she sent in a note for me to read. So how's that? Um,
Yeah,
she
fire
says,
away.
I like how detailed the work is and the use of blacks for shading. A lot of people think that using black for shading is a no-go, in, but it's graphic novels like that that use the style in a unique and gritty way that actually works. Blacks for shading, notably, being something that can be just not work in lesser hands, can be not just unsettling but take you out of the work. But in this, that the art is not just competent, but also it is this thing that draws your eyes to specific things on the page in a very specific way. It can be hyper detailed, but it can also have
Mhm.
these moments of giving these large silhouettes. but you tend to know, maybe with a couple exceptions, what's going on. But it's like interesting. Like on the first page, you see a mass of people, but because of how they're drawn, they blend together into a singular mass that like there's the thing over it. And unfortunately, I'm not this like super competent, understander of art, but it is a thing that informs the experience of reading this.
Yeah. Yeah, it is people, it is sky, it is road, and it frames our protagonist here in the sixth panel, 16-year-old Evie Hammond. She's
Hmm.
getting dolled up for a night on the town. Well, I say a night on the town.
Make it sound fun. Yeah.
It's not fun. She's going out to sell her body because her child labor job at the factory just is not cutting it. She makes
At the munitions
munitions
factory.
at
Yeah.
the munitions factory. Yes, she's been working there since she was 12.
Because
Um,
they're fighting a war that gets mentioned like twice in Scotland
yeah,
against the
yeah,
Scottish Liberation Front. And like when I say mentioned twice, I mean way in the background.
yeah.
Um,
It's there's like one newscast on it, and then yeah, it's blink and you'll miss it. That's the thing.
mhm,
Like it's against the backdrop of, as you said in Alan Moore's intro, right? There has been a nuclear war. The Soviet Union and the United States, led by Ted Kennedy in this reality,
mhm,
have come to blows over something going down in Poland. Europe's
mhm.
been obliterated. Africa's been obliterated. Um,
Presumably America as well. It
yeah,
doesn't
there's
really
there's like
say. The
there's like
Soviet Union's still around though.
there's
It
like famine
actually,
conditions, yeah, in the Soviet Union because of the nuclear winter, but that's literally, there is a pet theory, and I don't really want to espouse it one way or another until I see the film, but there is a theory that I find funny that Mad Max takes place in the V for Vendetta continuity.
why not?
We don't hear anything about Australia, indeed, or pretty much anywhere else in the world, outside of Britain. Britain's cut off.
I thought Mad Max was just how Australians lived. I thought that was just a documentary, and Tom Hardy just braved the outback.
That could very well be. That could very well be.
I think that's the case, actually.
Who run Bartertown? No. So there's a with nowhere to colonize, of course, Britain's turned its repressive force in on itself. So, it is, as Moore said, it is the surveillance state, it is the carceral state, it is the police state ramped up to 11. And there's this party that's taken over called Norse Fire,
Norse
harkening
Fire.
back to England's like Germanic roots. It's very much Nazis but different. Um,
Yeah, and they call themselves fascists
yes.
explicitly as well.
Oh,
You
there's a
have
whole monologue by Chancellor Adam Susan about why he's a fascist.
yeah, a fascist and a shall we say technophile?
One could say that. One could say that. We'll unpack that a little.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so Evie's little evening routine is juxtaposed with that of our deuteragonist, perhaps.
Hmm.
The man
The
in
boy
the
himself,
yeah,
yeah.
the boy himself, the man in the Guy Fawkes mask with the knives. They're getting and again, this is a sequence that I thought the film did pretty well,
Oh yeah.
because it's, again, there's many beats in the film that replicate the book really well, because here is a newscast going on. The voice of fate is laying out the situation, in terms of rations, in terms of riots being put down. um
I think
and yeah,
the movie kills the aesthetic. Like it does the aesthetic very well, I think.
it does the
Um,
aesthetic, but it shows the face of, the voice of fate, which I think is a
yes.
mistake.
Yeah, it's an interesting what they're doing is they're making it Glenn Beck, right?
Oh,
And
yes.
the movie wants and like I guess we should like say this more explicitly when we make movie comparisons.
Hmm.
The movie is about basically early 2000s George W. Bush and like Tony Blair. Like it is a I think like Patriot Act piece for the most part.
It's Glenn Beck with, God, I remember going to the movies when I was like 10 or 12, when Glenn Beck was still just like getting off the ground, and like in the like advertisements for not like films but like just like media events, Fathom and whatnot, like there would be commercials for Glenn Beck of him like sobbing about one thing or another, and that was his
Mhm.
thing at first. Like he would get worked up and cry. He was kind of like, I mean, he was a less angry Alex Jones in terms of demeanor. And I was 10, I didn't understand it, but I was
Jordan
like, huh.
Peterson meets Alex Jones.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's weird, but
Mhm.
there's an element of off the wallness and an element of playfulness that
Mhm.
fascism employs when it's kind of getting its hooks in, that you
Yeah.
have to be vigilant about.
And in this case, V is actually steps in and does a monologue to protect Evie from the attacks of Fingerman. Fingerman being like the secret police in
Yes,
this
she
society.
propositions a, secret policeman. They're about to rape her because that's their legal prerogative.
Hmm.
They can do what they like with her and then turn her in.
And V kicks their ass, kills a couple of
Yes.
them, drops them, and does like the monologue from the beginning of Macbeth, where he says
Yes.
his sword smoked with bloody execution, and does the whole, and V will constantly be quoting things and
Yeah.
hearkening back. Um,
And I want to point out as well, what he's saying from Act 1, Scene 2 of Macbeth. The multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him, and fortune on his damned quarrel, smiling, showed like a rebel's whore. But all's too weak for brave Macbeth. Well, he deserves that name. So at that point in Macbeth, right, Macbeth is talking about this rebellion that he's put down. He is a war hero in Scotland because he's
mhm,
beaten this guy MacDonald, in the
mhm,
forces of Ireland and Norway.
mhm.
Um, but Macbeth himself, of course, goes on to be he goes on to be the villain, so he has a
Spoiler
per
alert!
uh,
Spoiler alert!
for a 400-year-old play. Yes,
Hmm.
yes, yeah, from James the Second. So yeah, he's saying right off the bat, okay, there is a hero who has a moment, who has a function that he fulfills, who will go on to be obsolete, who will go on to be
Yeah,
struck down.
and indeed to be villainous.
Yes.
Yeah. And then he proceeds to blow up Parliament.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um, yeah,
notably, the ending set piece in the movie is the beginning set piece in the book.
yeah. It basically so the final scene in the movie is him blowing up Parliament is fulfilling what Guy Fawkes failed to do.
Hmm.
The book basically decides to do that, but with like the head, which is like the fascist core. Like it's the place they've built. I guess the movie just decided, I don't know. It doesn't really matter.
Well,
But
because
he does this whole dramatic thing.
Americans don't know what 10 Downing Street is.
Yeah.
That's because that's what gets blown up at the end of the book. Spoiler
Mhm.
alert.
And yeah, Evie is now with V, and it's like, well, she has nowhere to go. Um, and he takes her back to his lair,
His man
where
cave.
he just like has all the art that has ever been created. And then you get what is interesting to me, which is so much of this. I don't know if it's most, but like a good half of this is spent in the quote unquote villains, like with the
Yes.
villains. It is with the police hunting for V. It is with the Adam Susan, basically the Fuhrer or whatever, the president. I don't know what it's supreme leader with, the wives of these people. With a lot of like characters who work and notably the different ministries, which are like, kind of 1984 adjacent. You have the big screens, all that.
Hmm.
The big
Named after the I mean, you have the fingermen, of course, the
Yes, the
hand, right?
finger. Yeah.
That's carrying out the secret police stuff. You have the ear, which is surveillance. You have the
Yeah.
eye, which is also surveillance. You have the
Yeah.
nose, which is like
The normal police,
yeah,
basically.
your detectives and whatnot. He
Yeah.
likes face imagery in this book, does more. And indeed, I mean, one of
Mhm.
my favorite panels early on is this is the face of Britain, says the broadcast, and it's Evie's face painted up to go out and prostitute herself.
Yeah.
It's a really stark indictment of of where the Norse Fire government has plunged people into.
And it's notable as well because it's just the concept of being a part of the whole, being a part of the machine,
Yes.
to be just another brick in the wall, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, everyone applaud my impression. Of course, that was great. But it's the idea of like, no, you're the nose, and then you work for the nose, and it's like being small. And they all work for this like supercomputer called Fate, which they've basically set up to just dictate where things go in the economy. Um, Fate, notably, we don't really know much about Fate, the supercomputer. We don't really know that much of what it's doing day to day. We know only Adam Susan is really supposed to usually have access to it. that being the chancellor, supreme leader dude. And we know like he wants to fuck it. He's like, I've never known a woman's touch, but fate, it's beautiful and it does not know love. And it basically it's like, it's the algorithm, it's the market, it's do that as you will. It is the thing making the calculations.
Hmm.
And notably, and I think it like um and it's actually one of the book's like weird missteps, I think, is how they introduce like basically V has been controlling fate to some extent. And that's like been how he's been pulling things off. You find that out towards the end. Not that it's like a bad plot point, but it is like a little bit of a weird thing that comes up later on, but we can get into it. A misstep is a weird way of putting it. I find it to be like kind of strange, Deus Ex Machina, call it what you will.
Well,
Um,
and notably, like V is always one step ahead of Norse Fire. He's
mhm.
always one step ahead of the Nose and all those
He's
guys.
never threatened really at all in
At
this
all,
book.
at
Yeah,
all. And we'll get into it, but in many ways V is a force of nature, right?
yeah,
He is this inevitable sort of embodiment of contradiction, right,
yeah.
that this government has produced. And I mean, like CLR James, no, not CLR James, Marx said that he's the weapon that's been forged by the hand of the oppressor that will bring him down, right?
Hmm.
um and yeah, I agree with you. Him sort of having hacked the computer from the beginning is something I don't think needed to be explained. I was perfectly fine with the mystique of it. Again, we're splitting hairs here.
I do want to know, I completely forgot to add this. I wrote this. The film sees Parliament as the great evil. The book sees it as outdated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important like framework here as well. Um, but yeah, um, the voice of fate is not a talking head. It is the voice of a computer, and it is a actual guy recording it. People are supposed to think that the computer is speaking. That is like the state as a disembodied truth versus personality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, More is again an anarchist, therefore individualism is seen as basically the highest good, freedom as the highest good, and therefore the compartmentalization, the facelessness of the state, the facelessness of the voice of fate, the just AI-ness of fate. I imagine I can't imagine what Moore thinks about ChatGPT, but it's got to be some unalt un some unutterable screeching curse and a dead language, I have to
Oh,
imagine.
100%. Well,
He
and the thing
believes it's
about
Satan magic, I have to assume.
yes. Well, and you know what the worst part of it is
And it is.
when there is a voice of fate and when there is a totalitarian Brit I hate that word totalitarian, but you know what I mean. When there is a voice of fate and when there is a fascist Britain, and ChatGPT is running the computer, all the propaganda posters it produces are gonna have the weirdest fucking hands.
Oh, honestly, that's an interesting concept. Black Mirror episode right there. AI runs society, and it's like as shitty as the AI is right now. Write it
No,
down.
and the whole time that the episode is playing, right, it cleverly sort of leaves people's hands out of frame, and then
It's
like
good.
somebody's having breakfast and the camera pans down and his hands are really friendly.
There we go. There we go. Um, yeah. So to just and at this point, you kind of find out a little bit about the background. There was a war in 1988 with President Kennedy. Like we said, there was this war, many years of chaos, and the Norse Fire takes over in 1992. More
Yes.
correctly describes fascism as a blend of corporate and reactionary power, pulling from the aesthetics of the past. It is now 1997. They have been in power for 5 years.
Yes.
More is not Moore is aware of what a fascist is. He is aware of what it means to be a fascist and not just an authoritarian right winger.
Hmm.
He's on it with that.
Well, and as well, you have that illusion of order that
Mm,
fascism depends on. I mean, Evie herself, when she sees V blowing up the Palace of Westminster, right? Her first reaction is, "Oh my God, you can't do that. That's illegal." Right?
yeah,
The question of morality has been solved and settled by this authority.
right. 911. What's your emergency? He can't do that. That's illegal. It's and notably, like it's very early in this like first beginning part where you kind of have the vendetta introduced as you learn about throughout it because V has a vendetta. Obviously against this society in general, but more specifically against those who wronged him personally and those around him at the Lark Hill concentration camp. Um, and the first guy on his list is the voice of fate, Louis Prothero. And he's got these like ironic punishments he does for people. Louis Prothero was his captain, so he puts him through this whole thing where he's has to be an inmate in the concentration camp, and he sees all his precious dolls that he collects because he's a creepy doll collector get burned, and then he basically breaks the guy's mind. Um,
Hmm.
this is where we see V is obsessed with aesthetics. He's obsessed with theatricality. He can basically accomplish any feat of theater he wants to. He can essentially do anything. V is, I mean, like there are elaborate threads online proving V doesn't do anything supernatural technically, and I guess that's true. But V is not of this world. V is able to work beyond. There is no official meta-human superpower here, but like everything he is able to elaborately do is basically the spirit of like what Joshua said, contradiction, the spirit of the press, the spirit of those murdered at Larkhill, basically in this guy that is
Hmm.
fucked up and yeah, twisted, jokerfied, whatever you want to call him. He is a little jokerfied. He is going to become the V Vendetta, and he is, um, he's he's on a rampage, and with all the power that brings.
Yes, you get a sense of you get a sense of the experiments done on him and how he's the only one who came through like all this weird chemical shit. Like um the concentration camp prisoners are put through like brutal like chemical like testing experimentation. Like it's real Joseph Mengele shit, right?
Yeah,
This person
they're like growing fingers out of their
like thighs, yeah,
back and
like
stuff. Yeah,
bizarre teratomas, like plasticky skin. V is the one person who comes out of it intact, and he channels it into, yeah, this long complex revenge and prison break. Like he befriends Louis Prothero and the other officials in the concentration camp. He wins them over, at least on a conversational sort of he builds a rapport with them. He gets
yeah,
access
like
to
fertilizer and
yeah,
nitrogen and stuff, and
yeah,
makes
fertilizer,
yeah.
importantly, yes, and he's able to make napalm and mustard gas and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and he's been
And
systematically killing everyone who worked at that camp. And he's like
yes,
his final three targets are Louis Prothero, this priest, and then this lady that he's actually not that mad at.
yes, so
Um,
does he have superpowers? Is he super intelligent? I don't think it matters. The point is he is somebody who has had time, and he's somebody who knows how to play these fascists against each other, which indeed, the the dynamic between, as you said, the way that we spend time with the villains and the dynamic between them is so fascinating to me. Like you
yeah,
see from the beginning during the second broadcast that we see about the destruction of the Palace of Westminster, you have Almond and you have Mr. Dascom, two of the heads just kind of at each other's throats. You know,
if there's one thing you learn from the personal life of these fascists is that fascists don't get any bitches. They might be married, but it's absolutely sauceless. Whether you're Adam Susan wanting to fuck a computer or these other guys with their wives who are like, I do not want to look at you.
well, they
Um,
take great pleasure in seducing each other's wives. As people, of
yeah,
course, have
yeah,
said.
absolutely. You have a guy like that's like this, and this is a very sexual book too. I mean, everything Moore writes, he has a lot of sexuality in every. Like, he wrote that like he wrote an essay like he believes, and he wrote this in his essay on porn that a society's liberation is directly tied to how sexually free people are allowed to be, and that the marker of like success and like well-being in a society is directly tied to like whether or not you have sexual liberty. It's a very anarchist thing to say. But you get where he's making the connections, right?
Yes.
It's about freedom, right?
Hmm.
And all of it. I mean, like, later on, you even have like V is constantly using the idea of like, I used to love justice and she was a mistress. And now she loves, he even says, chains and whips and masks and jackboots. And
He
it's all very like
he does
this.
this addressing, that statue of Lady Justice on top of the Old Bailey when he destroys
Which
that.
can you imagine if that scene was in the movie? I understand why it can't be in a movie, but God, Hugo Weaving doing that scene, how fucking weird that would have been, and how like it would have been a lot of fun. I
He
gotta say.
himself could make it work. How it would be directed, I don't know.
I don't know. I'm interested to see in what like a literal one-to-one adaptation of this graphic novel would be as a film. It would
Hmm.
be so weird and out there. Um,
I mean, Moore wanted to do it at one point.
yeah, he did. He did. Um, he and I also want to note, we've not talked too much about Evie because at this point Evie does not have a lot of agency, which is the
Mhm.
point. V has picked this girl for whatever reason. Maybe it's just that her name is Evie, which is like Eve, as in like the first woman making her choice, and V, which is the letter he loves so much. Um,
Also, E and V, 5 letters respectively from the beginning and the end of the alphabet.
Yeah, and of course, the V in V for Vendetta itself, it's a reference to the phrase in Latin that means, "By the power of truth, I, while living, have conquered the universe," which comes from Faust,
Yes.
who also made a deal.
Yeah,
Uh,
and and indeed, in it's only in Goethe that he starts to be redeemed. In the original legend, he just went to hell
mhm.
when his time was up.
And Evie, though, not a lot of agency, very different dynamic. Not that Natalie Portman does a bad job in the film, but there is a big difference when a character is 16 years old rather than mid-20s. And she does
Yes.
not have memory of before this. Like
Hmm.
she remembers the bad times pre-fascism, post any kind of liberal order, post-war, and she remembers fascism. And that's her entire experience and frame of reference. And she's defined entirely by her like parental issues, like serious daddy issues, like having dreams about like sex dreams about her father at one point, and like projecting on V this fatherhood that is not there. Her father, notable socialist, apparently. Um,
He
and
he first appears in a Save the Whales shirt, which I found funny.
so true. I think the whales didn't do so well in this one, but it makes the character of V a little different, right? Because he saves her, but I mean, he also kidnaps this
So
girl.
I was thinking about it, and we'll get into that eventually, but it's not so much revolutionary suicide that he introduces Evie to as revolutionary murder, if that makes sense.
A lot of
Right?
it.
It's specifically well, we're jumping ahead. The first thing, I mean, you see shades of it in how he uses her as bait for his next
Mhm.
target, who is Father Lilliman. And
Yeah.
Father Lilliman, of course, we see in the next major sort of villain scene, right? The major Norse Fire Party members are at Westminster Abbey. They're taking in a sermon. I really like I mean, I don't like it, but the sermon that Lilliman gives, saying, thank you, God, you've delivered us from, the fire in the sky. There's an evil walking among us. It's a really intriguing, like, sort of remysticization of Christianity for fascist ends
Yeah.
that he delivers on. I
And he
the
talks about like one community, one race, all of those things,
Ein
like
Reich, ein Volk,
he's
ein
a-
Führer, yeah, that sort of
yeah,
thing.
he's able to sort of synthesize, that, slip it in. And you also have just Moore's critique of Christianity in general, how easily it can be subverted to the end because of
Hmm.
its like hierarchical nature.
Yeah.
And then you see them just like all the like not lords, but all the ministry heads like and their wives like bitching at each other outside the church immediately
Also,
afterwards.
Hayer's wife, what was her name?
Oh,
Um,
Hare's wife, she's like quite important.
yeah, she only in like
Helen,
the
Helen Hare.
Helen Hare, yes.
She's quite thematically important, I would say.
Thematically, yeah. In the third book, she really comes into her own. But this intrigued me, and I'm not sure what to make of it. She's totally in black and white in this scene, and it's
Hmm.
really stark.
It is
It's really
bizarre.
stark. I don't know why.
Helen Hare, yeah. Helen Hare, which like notably is a schemer. Like she is Lady Macbeth. We did the Macbeth thing. Helen Hare is Lady Macbeth.
She's
Yeah.
also got that HH thing going on that I just noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, and then you have the priest, and then like, what do you know? It's a pedophile priest. Um,
Hmm.
to be fair, not as much of a stereotype in the early 1980s, before like a lot of the
Ooh.
revelations came out in the early 2000s. But this also shows like people knew what was going on.
Yeah.
More received heavy criticism for this, but he was like, I didn't expect Catholics to read V for Vendetta anyway. Um, Fair enough. And yeah, they have this thing. He says, not too old, I trust. And then it's like, no, she's 15, and he's like
Oh
upset
God.
about it. And then you have a line like this, like self-assured line from like the priest's attendant where he says, let me see if I can get the quote exactly right. No peace for the wicked, but the righteous can get a peace whenever they feel like it.
God,
Um,
that's so fucking chilling. I love that.
and I also like, and I mean, I don't like it, but it's horrifying. The pedophile saying 15. Well, Job bore his burdens.
God, that's vile. That's so twisted.
And then you have like the most, and I love the way like, and then like V kills him playing Beethoven's Fifth to like to like drown out certain things he says, and V kills him with a cyanide communion wafer, and
Yes.
he says if transubstantiation is true, then you will survive. Like the most r/atheism. It's killing him with a cyanide wafer.
And
Oh,
again,
it goes
yeah,
so hard.
there is a you can't help but think of, the r/h atheism, right? The I'm 14 and this is deep.
Mhm. And
But
they love
again,
this, yeah.
yeah, they
And it's
again,
fine, you know?
yeah, because V did it first, and that's his whole point. Like he's making the revolution that he's putting into practice. He's making theatrics of it, right? He's very consciously setting up this a very
A vicious
a
cabaret.
vicious cabaret, yes, a very irreverent sort of aesthetic, cludging together various theatrical
And
traditions,
he
various
leaves
literary references, music
flowers,
references, yes, flowers as well.
an
You know,
extinct species of rose.
well, and indeed, drawing threads of extinct culture that people are left to kind of wonder at, because
Mhm.
they are divorced from their context, but it's because we get the sense that nobody really goes back and reads in the society at large. You
You
know,
notably don't have anywhere that it straight up says like books are banned or something like that. Um,
in the
like
movie you
talking,
do. In the movie you
yes, in the
do. Like,
film you have a lot about banned media.
yes.
In this, maybe,
Hmm.
but it never outright says anything is banned. I honestly get the impression this is much more Fahrenheit 451, that there is just such a deluge of shit
That
that
people don't
like,
really care to
yeah,
yeah.
um, because like, and I, I found it quite bold, some of the choices they made in the movie, especially the time coming out to be like, you have a Quran, but that's banned. Like, there was a very clear thing that they were saying with the movie, and that was in its own context. In a scene shortly after this, Evie is very upset because she's like, I didn't know you were going to kill anyone. I have no idea what Evie thought V was going to do. I would push back and say she knew he was going to kill someone. She'd already seen him kill multiple people. I think she is dealing with her own guilt. And V is like, nah, you got to be down to kill people, dog. Like, and
He
actually
says,
he comes around on this a little bit later
mhm.
in the book. This is like maybe the one thing V like changes on in any way is he has this idea of molding Evie in the image of destruction, and Evie is to become the inheritor of the destruction and be
Mhm.
creation. There is a point later where Evie almost kills someone, and V stops her from committing the one time she was going to kill,
Yes.
um, which is very interesting. Um, and also in that scene where he's talking to her, he's reading a book that just has V on it. There's nothing else, and it is so fucking funny. He's just looking at a book that's just V, and it doesn't say what the book is,
He
and that
does.
is
I mean,
so funny to
he
me.
does have that Thomas Pynchon quote. It could be that book.
It could be, but it is so funny that the cover is
Mhm.
just a V. Like this dude. And like, yeah,
And
like
then
there
you
was
just
just
look
the part.
inside it, and it's just like the letter V over and over
It
again.
has to be. No, it's just like I'm imagining like it's literally like what music did he play? And he said Beethoven's Fifth and like tipped the cap. Like this edgy motherfucker. And like
Literally toward
yeah,
the end, like
exactly.
when he says ideas are bulletproof, he does the fucking like tip of the hat.
Hmm. And like Moore knows how funny this is. Like to be
Yes.
clear, like this is it's not it's supposed to be funny and ridiculous. This is a guy who is like not normal and good and cool necessarily. But
There
like he,
is
yeah,
there is a there's
normal
a
and good and
series of Harry
cool.
Potter fanfics.
My immortal, yeah.
Oh yes, there's Harry Potter and the Sword of the Hero, Harry Potter and the Defiance of the Hero, and then Harry Potter and the Soul of the Hero. And the author, I believe he's an urban fantasy writer now, so he's doing like legit like original fiction. But the story where like Harry starts out, as Harry Potter, and then by the end he and Voldemort are literally like throwing universes at each other like godlike. Like literally it ends with Harry recreating the universe but like shifting it slightly so that Voldemort and the Death Eaters are out of it. The point being that the prose is shot through with those references, you want to shake the hand that shook the world, I think Harry at one point says you want to dance with the devil in the pale moonlight, and it's like, why are they saying this? It's just cool.
Hmm.
There's not the context again that they're resurrecting culture to use as a weapon, right? There's not the
Hmm.
context that V has where he's using the threads of the old society as a garrote with which to choke the fascists out. It's just references for references sake.
Yes. And
And
I
that's the
will
sort of thing that gets spawned, unfortunately, by this very genuine use of the reference.
Spawn, notably a comic written by Alan Moore in 1994 that he said was part of his worst run he ever did.
Aha.
Never read it myself, so cannot comment. Um,
Spawn was a guest character in the Xbox version of Soul Calibur 2.
so true.
We're getting
Uh,
off track.
um, Book one ends with the revelation of what happened at Lark Hill, which we kind of already went over, and him killing the last woman who was there, leaving the woman who felt bad about it, and leaving her a Violet Carson flower. And in that moment, this dude Almond, almost catches V. He shows up at the scene of the crime, and his gun is not loaded. And the reason his gun is not loaded is he's been feuding with his wife because V has been in his fucking head. And so he put the gun up to his wife, but it was unloaded on purpose. And this dude has now like, yeah, as gone nutso. And because of that, because of the psychological damage and the psychological war V is waging, is able to escape and kill this guy. Thus widowing Rose Almond, who is quite important because she represents this character who like didn't particularly have a great relationship with her husband, but
Mhm.
now she's cut loose. The state is going to provide her with zero support, despite she was a housewife her whole life because she that's what he wanted her to be. She had a career, but like she left it. She was supposed to have kids with him, and it never happened. And so she's going to chase relationships, and she's eventually going to actually like become basically a sex worker and a dancer at a cabaret.
Mhm.
And that is going to be she is going to be this like alienated person as a result of that.
I love the fact that Almond forgets to load his fucking gun, right?
Yeah.
Because it's it really strikes at the heart of what fascism is, which fundamentally is cowardly, right? And it's about, not only brutal violence against your downtrodden, against your working class, against your undesirables, quote unquote,
Yeah.
but the cultivation of the idea thereof, right? You don't have to be surveilling everybody. You just have to have this idea that, incredible violence could descend upon you from the, corporate state apparatus, if you step out of line. And that's the thing. Like he gets so wrapped up in his own in that image, right? He literally says to V. He has a monologue before V comes and ices him, where he's like, "Well, now it's you and me, and I've got a gun and you don't," and that's all he has. It's very. I mean, 9 Inch Nails. I'm a big man and I have a big gun.
Yeah.
That
And
kind of posturing.
notably during this whole time, I guess we didn't make this point, but Eric Finch, who's a guy who works at the nose, has been investigating V and figuring out all this Lark Hill stuff. I make
Mhm.
that point just because he's like not honestly, he becomes more important later. There's a lot of threads here, and it honestly doesn't feel as overwhelming when you're reading it.
Yes.
Um, it feels very overwhelming when you're describing it, but it
Again, I
feels
I knocked this out in a single afternoon. I reread
yeah.
this before we went to record.
It's quite, I mean, I don't know that it's quite short. It's like a pretty normal length graphic novel, but it's like it's not something that it's meant to be quickly consumed. It can be
Yes.
reconsumed. Um and notably though, this all feels connected enough that it's not like difficult. Even when you like lose a character when you're reading it, you're like, who is that? It's like kind of like, oh, he's one of the ministry guys. We'll figure it
Hmm.
out. And you do. They say their name again and they say, oh, you from the nose. Like Moore knows this was written in syndication. Moore is writing it to remind you of certain things.
Right, exactly.
Um,
Because it's, yeah, as you say,
very
it's
effectively, by the way, I
serialized.
might add.
Mhm.
Yeah, very effectively, I might add. And let's just go to the
I want
fact.
to
Yeah,
before sorry
sorry. Yeah, go for it.
before we get away from the bit where he kills the priest,
Oh yeah, yeah, sure.
so he says at one point, I'm the devil and I've come to do the devil's work, right?
Mhm.
And when he first introduces himself, indeed, he quotes sympathy for the devil, right? I'm a man of wealth and taste. And if you'll notice in that little panel when he says that, he's got that little glare on his hair that looks like devil horns on page
Mhm.
54. It's very funny. But yeah, he says, I am the devil and I've come to do the devil's work, which is a Charles Manson quote,
Mhm.
which and that's where I think the message starts to crystallize because V doesn't even consider himself a hero. He doesn't consider himself a leader, I don't think. I think he considers himself a necessary evil, right?
Mhm.
He says, later on that there are people who destroy and there are people to create. And in a sense, these projects are separate entirely. Um, it's cyclical, I think, the way that V views his project and views the role of anarchy in combating fascism, and we'll get into the cyclical nature of it toward the end of the book. But it's striking to me, I think, that I mean, V kicks ass throughout, right? But we're not meant to idolize him.
It's also interesting because when you get V's backstory, you never know who he is, and it is never revealed. You never see his face. You don't know. We don't know what skin color this guy is. We know he's a guy just because he's a man, but we don't know. We know this. He came from a concentration camp, therefore he is one of the people society deemed necessary to destroy. Is he
Hmm.
gay? Is he black? Is he a communist? We don't know. Like
Is he a gay black communist?
probably. What he is someone who basically it did talk about all these people who did die during these experiments, some of them queer, some of them, yeah, all of those things. And he is a synthesis of that.
Hmm.
He is the oppressed striking back.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
he V is not, I wrote down eventually originally does more see V as like the proletariat. I don't think
Mm,
so. I don't think V is the proletariat exactly. I think
no.
V is like the most ostracized, the most like pushed down, the most beaten down. And
Hmm.
V is like whatever bubbles up out of that. And the idea of like, you cannot, no one but the oppressors can be held morally responsible for what bubbles out of the soup that they created.
Yes.
Um, and it is very like Children of Kali from Ministry of the Future. It is very whatever. It's like
Yeah.
no one here is saying that this is necessarily right, but what the hell did you think was going to
And
happen?
indeed, from the other side of it, we have the oppressors, we have the perspective of the oppressed with V, and something really striking. You ever read The Nazis Next Door by Eric Lichtblau?
No, I did not.
So, I've thought about this while I was reading about V's third major named victim, Dr. Delia Surridge, who was
Yeah.
basically like the Mengele of the Larkhill concentration
Yeah.
camp, right?
Mingala, he felt really, really bad about it and then wrote a diary.
The thing that Delia Surridge says when V comes and finds her is, it's you. I knew you'd come. And that's actually ripped from, I don't know if I don't know if Moore is specifically alluding to this, but in The Nazis Next Door, Eric Lichtblau writes about this female concentration camp guard at Majdanek, Hermina Braunsteiner, who escapes to Queens in New York, married a guy, had a life, outside of the horrific, like, she was called the stomping mayor of Majdanek because she would like kick people with steel-toed boots. She threw children by the hair into trucks. It was terrible. And when Nazi hunters finally tracked her down in 1964, the first thing she said, "My God, I knew this would happen. You've come."
Hmm.
So that's the thing. Like, there are people who know exactly what they've done, and all they do is just bury it.
Yeah. No doubt. No doubt. And speaking of like, knowing what they've done and then this thing they've created, Evie wants to know who V is. She thinks he's her father for a while.
And
And
he shoots that down immediately.
yeah, he's like, fuck no, I'm not your father. And he isn't exactly, not literally, but V is in the sense that her father is someone that was taken to the camps and killed, and he is the synthesis of that, right?
Hmm.
But he does take on this father role. I mean, like he's reading her bedtime stories. He's teaching her lessons, horrifying as they are. He's
Hmm.
reading her bedtime stories about the land of do as you please, which he sees as a sort of precursor to anarchy. Um, um, and interestingly, he says the sanctum that he's keeping her in is a sort of land of do as you please, but like the day will come where she has to be released. Um, and he is and she is indeed kicked out eventually. As like one of her lessons, he basically takes her outside and abandons her. Um,
God, that's so
because
fucking chilling.
yeah, and she doesn't know where she is and she's left outside. And
There-
at
there-
this
there- there's
yeah.
you get it, you get a first sort of look at his like elaborate the elaborate lengths that he goes to construct these fantasies as well, because there he is when she takes off her blindfold, and he's literally just like a wig and a cloak on a fucking
Hmm. With a tape recorder,
coat
yeah.
rack. Yes, yes, it is wild.
Yeah, he's just
And
able to do these things. And
mhm,
and she is left and she just ends up like shacking with some guy that she was eating from his trash can and he was like, "Do you want to come inside?" Like and people online are like will be like, "Well, was he working with V?" Like, no, it's just V's not doing all that. He's probably watching her, but like, you know,
by coincidence, though, he is involved with some criminal elements that have ties as well. Well, he is involved as well. He's friends with Finch. He's
yes,
not necessarily a government guy. He's just a smuggler who knows some people in high places. But that is a bizarre coincidence.
it is. Before we get into that, V has a news broadcast for humanity
Hmm.
that he pulls off. He does this whole elaborate thing where he goes in and he has bombs strapped to him and he gives a news broadcast and they think they've killed him, but it turns out they've killed just like the minister of the mouth or the voice.
Yes,
Um,
ask him.
Dascom, who is actually Rose Almond's second lover, and at that point that she has to like actually start prostituting herself and working at this cabaret.
Yeah,
Um,
we don't get a whole lot of time spent with Dascom and Mrs. Almond,
we just know
but
she doesn't want to be there, but she's like, what else am I to do?
exactly. There's a couple of moments where he's pursuing her and gets shot down, and then she goes to him and he's like, "Yeah, I knew you'd come." And we're left to imagine,
Yeah.
which is so much worse.
Yes. You also have but like these broadcasts is he's basically does this thing where he's firing humanity. He
Hmm.
says, "You've been at this for like 10,000 years and you've done a good job, but ultimately you keep appointing these new bad leaders and allowing this to happen and you are not rising up and so I'm firing you."
He's got a picture of Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini,
Hmm.
which is a weird comparison to make. There's a fourth guy as well that looks like Stepan Bandera, but I'm not sure.
It kind of cuts it off. It's hard to
Yeah.
tell. Yeah, he fires humanity for not wanting to be promoted as well. He says you don't have the will to be your own boss. He blames humanity for appointing bad management. This is, anarchism to a T. It is this idea of like, yeah, it is very removed from any concept of like material conditions, means of
Hmm.
production, anything like that, right? So you don't have V as this guy who's like you have been oppressed because there have been people who have owned things and people who have not. You also don't have V as this guy who says, there are stages of history. In a
Hmm.
very similar fashion to call back again, Kim Stanley Robinson, I think Moore sees capitalism as basically just like feudalism with more technology in a
Hmm.
lot of ways. Despite his accurate descriptions of certain things. It is like it's the same feudal concept. If you read interviews with Moore, he's saying like we need to transform our economy. We had feudal lords and now we have capitalists, and it's the same thing. It's
Hmm.
reductive. I understand why it's a rhetorically useful point. Um, but as an anarchist, he's just like lords and masters are bad. And
Hmm.
so this concept of like history has been you allowing lords and lords and masters being bad because that's what lords and masters are. They are therefore bad. And he's like, you have to be your own boss. You have to rise up. You have to take control of the situation. And of course, there's a lot of humor in it because it's like V pretending to be a boss and he's being very arrogant and goofy.
I
And like,
love the language he uses
oh,
here.
it's quite fun. It's quite fun. But nevertheless,
Can we read
Yeah.
short a
Yeah,
little
read from it.
excerpts?
Read from it.
Let's see. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Also, please don't think I've forgotten about your outstanding service record or about all the invaluable contributions that you've made to the company. Fire, the wheel, agriculture. It's an impressive list, old timer, a jolly impressive list. Don't get me wrong, but, well, to be frank, we've had our problems too. There's no getting away from it. Do you know what I think a lot of it stems from? I'll tell you. It's your basic unwillingness to get on with the company. You don't seem to want to face up to any real responsibility or to be your own boss. Lord knows, you've been given plenty of opportunities. We've offered you promotion time and time again, and each time you've turned us down. I couldn't handle the work, governor, you wheedled. I know my place. To be frank, you're not trying, are you? You see, you've been standing still for far too long, and it's starting to show in your work, and, I might add, your general standard of behavior.
Mm. And like, there is obviously there's like one can understand where there's truth and where there's not in that, but it is an interesting like dynamic. And you talk about this work being a manifesto,
Mm.
and in certain ways this feels like more talking directly to the audience in a lot of ways.
Yes.
You know, more might put it in different language, but this does feel as close to more that in like the bit about the like talking with like Lady Justice feel like as close to more like addressing the audience as it gets,
Mm-hmm.
kind of,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
And assigning, arrogating to himself, really, within the context of this story, V is protagonist status.
Mm.
You know,
So sorry, go ahead.
well, I mean, I suppose it's afforded to him by the by having survived and by having figured out
Well, that's
the
what I was
ins
gonna
and outs,
say.
right?
Is it like because there's two ways we can see this. One, we can
Yes.
see it as a crazed madman who is very competent, but the other is it is the oppressed and downtrodden of humanity. It is the children of Gaza and the immigrants left, you know, to die on boats, and you know people abandoned in jails, um, who have like fused into a person standing up and saying, "I judge you unfit." And then if you look
Mm-hmm.
at it that way, it feels a little different.
Oh yes, no mistaking. You know, critical support for V here, right?
Yeah,
You know, I'm not interested in condemning any formation that is the one formation fighting genocide.
he's quite successful. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if we can get a V, you know, we'll take it from there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have Evie now living with what's the guy's name? He's played by Stephen Fry in the movie.
Gordon.
Gordon. He's
Stephen
quite
Fry,
he's quite charming in the movie.
he's charming in the movie, not so in real life.
Is he
He
not?
signed that well, he signed that Stand with Israel resolution,
Dang it, I
and
didn't know that.
he's
Shoot.
also, I mean, he also kind of does the like Reddit new atheism thing that has much more smoke for Islam than for Christianity. Though he criticizes both, but he says, you know, Islam's like a special kind of evil.
Which is weird because in the movie he's like got the guy with the Quran.
Yeah, yeah, you know, you don't have to be a Muslim to appreciate the poetry of it. I love that
Mm.
line, you know?
Yeah. Nevertheless, in the book, he's like just some guy who happens to be like in too deep over his head with organized crime. Notably not because he's like some kind of criminal. He's actually like pretty anti-violent. He has a
Mhm.
gun and doesn't take it to the door when he knows he's dealing with people who are willing to kill him.
The fucking
Um,
Scotsman brings a sword to the gunfight, which is
that's
hilarious to
kicks
me.
so much ass.
The
I
the
will
the the,
say,
the
fuck
Scotsman,
more for making me read
yes.
the way he wrote that Scottish accent. I cannot understand half of what he's writing there. But no, the sword of the gunfight is fucking hilarious.
Yeah, there's a Scotsman. What's his fucking name?
He's
It starts with
he
an A.
I don't know. My man goes on to be one of the, you know, only people to get some in this book. So you got to
Mm-hmm.
hand some.
Mm-hmm.
Even, you know, because like let's not lie, you know, Helen Hare, Stone Cold Hottie, and he gets some with Helen Hare later on.
Alistair Harper.
Yeah, Alistair Harper. Yeah. Um,
10
and then
points from Gryffindor, Mr. Harper.
yeah,
Sorry.
and you have a moment here where, you know, obviously it's weird to like be like, oh wow, we're bummed out this guy died. Like he is having sex with a minor. Um, you know, that is also like part of this world. Like this isn't Moore isn't doing a thing. I don't think.
He's
You
not being lurid about it, you
no,
know,
yeah, that's
but
what I'm saying. He's not being lurid. He is aware that this is fucked up. He is like
yes.
aware of like the gender oppression in this. Like keenly aware, felt most keenly with Rose Almond, but
Mhm.
certainly also with Evie as well and her status in this world.
And how
Um,
childhood has been, basically, if not eliminated entirely, certainly rolled back, right? She's working in the munitions factory from fucking 12.
yeah,
Kids just have to grow up faster in this awful, awful world.
no doubt. But Gordon, he gets knocked off, and Evie very close to kills Alistair, and
Hmm.
V stops her. In what's, gotta be the most twisted thing V does in this book, puts her through his experience in a concentration camp, making her think she's in the concentration camp.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Notably, like she's and I love, the thing that Alan Moore says early in the author's note at the beginning of this edition of the book, right? About, certain things that certain small details that jump out at you out of the greater morass and kind of crystallize things for you that force you to just sit down and think. I mean, he's really, really good at pinpointing the sort of way that your mind works, right? You compartment under these conditions, right? You compartmentalize the horror and you focus on, something that would otherwise be mundane that would escape your notice. She keeps returning to the rat in her cell, right? There's a rat, I'm, in rags and it's cold, and they're bringing me like molded food, and there's a rat. Just
And they
again, and
yeah, and they
mhm,
shave her head and she looks old, like
mhm.
really old and wretched and terrible. And there's wrinkles on her face. And it's the way it's drawn is, everything's silhouettes, right? And of course, part of that is the literal explanation that these are marionettes and mannequins, that V is built an illusion here. But also it is shadows, as in, like, she's not having human contact. The only human contact she has is with, Valerie, which is the best part of the book, in my opinion.
Yes, yes, her
She
her
get
next door.
Yeah, her next door cellmate. Um, and notably, this is the actual cellmate that was next to V in his
Yes.
imprisonment.
Hmm.
Valerie sent him this note written on toilet paper. He kept it and has passed it on to her. And it is this note that's describing her life and telling why she's there. And it is the part of the movie that it absolutely kills. It is one of my favorite scenes in any movie of all time. It was like
Hmm. Hmm.
there was a part of that monologue that was deeply important for me as a, like, I think 17-year-old, like coming to terms with the fact that I was queer, and like admitting that to myself. I'll just say that. You have a part where she says, "It was my integrity that was important. Is that so selfish? It sells for so little, but it's all we have left in this place. It is the very last inch of us. Within that inch, we are free." Because you have Valerie telling the story of her life as a queer woman, as a lesbian, and she grows up and has, that normal, queer oppression pre like concentration camps and like her parents being against her, and she becomes an actress and meets someone she really loves and lives with her for a few years, and then the fascist regime comes and takes and drives her partner to betraying her, and then her partner commits suicide, and she is in this prison just beaten down to all nothing and injected with this
Hmm.
shit that's going to kill her. And she is experiencing like this moment of she only has this last inch, and she says, "It is strange that my life should end in such a terrible place, but for 3 years I had roses and I apologized to nobody."
Hmm.
And that is V's, fascination with the roses. And it's also, this scene that is talking about Valerie. It is showing these beautiful moments from earlier in her life and this beautiful woman and these cool things of acting and that sort of thing, and then transposed with the prison and the brutality of it, and Evie looking ancient and withered and haggard.
Hmm.
And then you realize, and then that's Evie coming to understand that last inch, of freedom, and the place
Yes.
where freedom is literally inconquerable, which
Hmm.
is the power that V also has.
Whence, and whence everything that V is, right? Whence the Shadow Gallery, right? Having a jukebox with all the greatest hits from the previous century, covered in posters from theater and film, the library with just all the classics, that's, whence his fascination with culture, with all things beautiful that people that, inspired, every kind of emotion, every kind of criticism, artistic movements, whence his using that to strike back at a world that has stamped out all forms of beauty.
Mm. And I would say Valerie is the closest we come to meeting V's actual identity, right? Like that
Mhm.
is the closest we're going to get to like who is V? V is Valerie. V, I mean, it's not, but like that's the closest character. Like when all of that is destroyed down to that inch. And then
Mhm.
V is that inch of integrity, despite it all that, whatever, that is going to, reclaim a potential freedom. And that therein, like, arises that obsession with freedom. But,
Mhm.
the scene is just really beautifully done, beautifully written. I can't really do it justice. You have to read it, and it's worth watching as well. And it's
Yes.
what gives Evie the determination to win. She is offered to sign a statement saying I condemn the terrorist V. Um, she says no, and he says take her out behind the chemical sheds to be shot, and she refuses, 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 and he says okay, then you're free. And he says everyone else in society has lived in a cage. You've lived in a cage your entire life. You are afraid of the wind. He says people like the man you were with, your father, they were taken behind the chemical shed to be shot. They have lived in this cage that is not to be like to internet or whatever, but society, not to be too whatever, that the cage is society, the cage is a lack of freedom. In this case, the cage is literal fascism.
Mhm.
Um, and she is now even inside a cage, completely free of the cage. And that is V's justification for why he has done this. That is the book does not say, wow, what a cool guy V is for this.
Mhm.
You're not supposed to think that, but Evie has now gone through that experience. She has become capable of carrying on his legacy. And she has this moment where she's standing in the water, pouring down on top of her from the rain. There's no more masks. She feels like she's going to suffocate. And he says, breathe that free air in. And she is now this fully realized free human. She is the embodiment of this anarchy that Moore believes in. You know?
She just had to go through, that same torture first, is the thing. And that's a stumbling block for a lot of people. It's a stumbling block for me.
Yeah,
Once the phrase, revolutionary murder that sort of came to me, right? Because it's not it's not necessarily her evolving politically through struggle, right? It's somebody has foisted this upon her, has drawn her into this horror. And you can argue perhaps that it would have happened would have happened eventually anyway. But I mean, it's wrenching and it's brutal. And it's, I mean, page 153, I'm given an examination. I think it's the woman. Do the math, right?
Mhm.
Like, it's, again, V is, um I mean, he's not somebody to be idolized. He's not somebody to be looked up to. He is a force of nature that does terrible things. Um and it's not pretty. It's not.
Mhm.
But
The uh
again,
the closest thing I can like I mean like I've been reading about like different intellectual traditions, and
hmm
I don't know how to say the guy's last name. It's Sergei Neshayev, the guy who wrote
hmm
the Catechism of a Revolutionary, that coined the term the revolutionary is a doomed man, and he was basically
mm
anarcho-nihilism, and that is V in a sense, right? But that is like rather than that being the full coin, there are two halves of the coin. V is this destructive fire. V is literally born into V-hood, um, in fire, in mustard gas and napalm,
hmm
and Evie is born into it in the scene holding out her arms in water. She
Yes.
is baptized. She is in this redeeming, life-giving thing. She is the other side of this anarchy. But notably that same pain has to be gone through in this calculation.
Mhm.
Um, and then we cut to away from this long scene, back to the bad guys. Finch is reading Roots of Coincidence, trying to understand Jungian psychology to catch V, which is a very good bit. Um, and you then have like this whole ridiculous scene where V kills a cop by getting him out onto a ledge and dropping a banana under his foot, and he
hmm
slips and falls. Like, I feel like Moore is like, okay, take a deep breath. We're gonna kill a guy with a banana. Are
Mhm.
you happy?
Does that come like in the middle of this book for you?
It's like at the end. It's like at the end
Oh
of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
two.
Yeah. It's because it comes at the end. Like it's an extract that chronologically that's where it is.
I think so.
Yeah, it's just set apart from the rest. Yeah, but yeah, it works as a breather episode for sure. Because
Mm,
holy shit, do we need one?
hmm and at this point, we already mentioned it. Rose Almond is now working at a cabaret and as a sex worker. And you have these different very lurid scenes that Moore loves to do, like showing sexual imagery
Hmm.
and then like having horrifying things as the backdrop to it.
Oh, we should talk about yeah, because like
Yeah.
that's so Gordon before he gets got by the Cutlass, of course, he takes Evie to this cabaret. It's there's a really sick irony here because it's a cabaret, it's Weimar Germany sort of style, but it's a fascist song
Yeah.
that is being sung here with really, the rhyming is the lyrics are very clever, but unmistakably fascist in nature.
Mhm.
And while this is going on, Mrs. Almond's card is declined. She's kicked out of the place because, of course, she's cut off from her husband's wealth.
And she
Mr.
goes on to work at that exact same place.
Yes,
Mm.
Mr. Creedy is telling this guy, hey, look, you had these favors from the party, and Dascom's out, and I'm in, and no, Almond's out, and I'm in,
And Mr.
and
Creedy being now the new head of the Fingermen, and
yeah,
this
Mr.
guy
Creedy
that
is the new head of the
and
Fingermen.
he's
Yes.
this kind of this brutal guy who's like, I'm gonna take over. He's
he
like,
yeah
Adam Susan's out, I'm in.
he's more or less introduced no he's introduced when Finch fucking decks him,
Yeah.
which is funny, but where he really comes into his own here and you get a sense of who he is him telling this guy, oh yeah, your mother who you've been using your party favors to keep in her place, yeah, she's in a home, and the home is just like three guys with iron bars beating her to death.
Yeah. And you have like more scenes like this. You have a scene later where a scene later where you have, oh my God, what's his name? Hayer seeing his wife cheating on him, video of it, and then fighting with the guy actively, and there's like them interacting, cutting and smashing each other, and um Rose Almond dancing and like having these like sexual moments, and she's like thinking about how like fucking how much she hates the state and is
Mhm.
going to kill. uh
Do you think there's anything to her name being Rose? Like, is that tied up with any of the Rose imagery?
I mean, it has to be, but I did. She's Oh, holy shit, I'm a dumbass. He says I have a special rose for Adam Susan.
There we go. There we go. That's
Yeah.
the thing, right? Because
And the
it's
idea is somehow V did all of it. He says there's no such thing as coincidence, which is a thing authors do love to do when they don't want to explain something, but they don't want you to think it's a coincidence. But it works here because V is God, okay?
mhm.
Sometimes V is God, and that's just how it works here.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Because V starts something that can't be stopped, right? When he takes down this government,
The
right?
dominoes, literally, that he
Yeah,
sets
yeah,
up.
he starts a general insurrection. And so, I mean, I like the irony of, I have a special rose for Adam Susan. Um, I really, really want him not to know, like, Mrs. Almond what she's doing, right? I
Hmm.
really, really want it to be the case that, look, like, you're letting the roses grow. You are owning the implications of what you're setting in motion without taking a direct hand in the violence. I really want him to just be saying, look, Adam Susan is going to be the first casualty of this general insurrection.
And I think that's maybe what Moore has in his head. The thing is, I feel like if you asked him, did V know about it? You'd be like, yeah. And if you said, did V not know about it? And he was saying that, he'd probably also say, yeah, because like that's not really the point, you
Mhm.
know? But
Yeah,
I like your interpretation better. Um,
yeah, in the sense of V knowing everything just in the abstract, sure, you
yeah,
know.
in some broad, but like the point is like, like Susan's goose is cooked. Um,
And good riddance to him.
And good riddance to him. At this point, V just cripples the government. He blows up their like surveillance apparatus at the beginning of book 3 and just starts the purge.
For
And he says
3 days, nobody's gonna look at you, nobody's gonna listen to you. You can do what you want.
and there's like clashes in the streets, and the police get pushed back on, and you have like even a scene of like a girl doing just graffiti and these random act outs, and people are like, I don't have my programs, and you have, it's kind of, and he says, we're not quite in the land of do as you please yet. We're in the land of take what you will. Um, and
The
and it, sorry,
the
go ahead.
girl lives in the book.
Yeah,
We are
she
led to
does.
assume. I don't think we ever see her again,
Hmm. Yeah,
which
she's just kind of
is
a thing. It's just like a moment. And at this point, V has set up the dominoes, both literally and figuratively. And
mhm.
it's like it's all coming down. At this point, like V doesn't really have to do anything else in the book. Like the government's over. All the agencies now have plans to take each other over. Adam
Yes.
Susan's gonna die somehow. The
I
dude's
love
brain
how
is cooked.
I love how they just yeah, because he's going nuts because he's jerking off to his computer, and his
Yeah.
guards are just like, they can only just pretend not to hear.
Very funny scene of him like yelling, like, I love you. And the guards like make eye contact.
And then they're just like, yeah, yeah, we're collecting a paycheck.
I understand why that's not in the movie because it would be a very difficult thing to put in the movie and make coherent, but God,
Yeah,
that would be funny in the
that
movie,
would be very, very funny.
especially with
You know,
their casting. But
Hair, of course, is the woman behind the man, right? She's trying to set her husband up as the next leader, and she's also banging Alistair Harper,
her
the like
husband who's banging to have sex or begging to have sex at all times.
yes.
Like he's like
Yes.
literally, there's a scene where he's literally on his knees kissing her feet, trying to have sex with her. And she's like, maybe when you become the most powerful man in the world, I'll consider it.
She's such a despicable person, but I do
Oh,
love
she's
that
the
energy.
worst. It's so fun.
Hmm.
Um, but then she's just like having sex with this random, like just like thug.
With yeah,
It's
with
awesome.
this the Scotsman that killed Gordon, who
Guy who
Creedy.
uses a cutlass.
Yes, yes, who and critically, Creedy employs him to be kind of a to get kind of brown shirts out on the field
Hmm.
as some extra manpower. But
Yeah,
then
and
she's like, I love this. She's like, whatever he's paying you, I'll pay you more. And
he
Harper,
lies.
yeah, yeah, he lies through his teeth. He's making 400 a week, but he says to her, well, he's paying me 500, and she's like, really? I would have expected four max.
Um, at this point, and this is like a weird like you have we mentioned it earlier. V's been controlling Fate, the computer, and he's using it to make things not work as well.
Hmm.
Um, this feels like a little bit like more explaining how V does things. And like is fine. I don't know how necessary that is. Um,
Yeah, I feel like letting the contradictions come to fruition
mhm.
would be. I mean,
And it also like lays question like because then you have to ask like what how what like
mhm.
and I guess it's idea of like Susan took my woman so I took his. He loves Fate, he loves the computer,
You know
but the
what that is?
computer is not central enough, I think,
Yeah,
to the government because like
I
we
mean,
know that it's
it's very much, it is Susan's fetish for the ideal England that he's building. It is his fetish
Mhm.
for absolute control and knowledge of the economy, where everything is allocated, how everything's planned, and the perfect knowledge of who's saying what, right? It's authority, it's control, and it's, the obvious thing therefore is that, oh well, this your woman's actually been, V says I betted her first, right?
Right,
It's that rug pull, and you realize, oh, you're actually not in control. Yeah.
right. And then like then you reveal, more V war crimes that he's been causing intentional famines and blackouts and stuff.
Which
Uh,
again, that is something that I like better from the movie than in this, right? Because like it's the Finch character in the movie is like, look, something at some point, there will be some spark that sets people off, and you don't know what it'll be, and it's the kid who dies, right?
yeah.
Um, that feels much more organic than
Hmm.
the deliberately sort of inciting food riots.
Well, yeah, V is no, that, and this is like maybe a principal problem I have with the politics of the book. It's that there is almost no role of the masses of the people. They are at the
Hmm.
end given the choice that V has therefore given them, but the people have no role in actually bringing down the government. I guess you could say, oh, well, they did some of the food riots, but they were marionetted, they were puppeted into doing the food riots.
They have no
Uh,
role, and crucially, like at the end, um, when Evie takes up V's mantle, right, and kidnaps Stone, Finch's sidekick, to be her protege, right? It's implied that there's going to be some mystical anarchist waiting in the wings to strike should people decide to do the wrong thing again,
Right.
which feels a little bit paternalistic.
Sure. It's interesting. You have this, just to mention it, Finch kind of just goes crazy, takes some LSD at the concentration camp.
Which is a personal sort of it's a personal sort of it's a thing that Alan Moore has,
Yeah,
that
he's interested in LSD.
mhm.
Takes a lot of it himself. Um, at least used to. He says, I believe he said, there's a really good interview with him that I really like. I have a bad habit on this podcast of plugging way more successful podcasts. And I shouldn't be doing that. But he has a really good interview from like 2018 on Chapo Trap House that I recommend people listen to. It's a free
Mm.
interview. It's a weird cross section. I don't know why or how that interview happened, but he gives a remarkably interesting interview and he's talking about Jerusalem in that, but worth listening to if you're interested in him as a guy and how he talks and communicates. But yeah, it's a thing Moore wants to do, and it's like kind of Finch being like, I knew it's like kind of the idea of like, he wasn't a bad man, he was just doing whatever, and he's like, I miss you have this like moment that you do feel he's like, I miss, seeing people with different skin tones. I miss people's pink hair. I
And he
miss,
was
you
immersed
know,
in that. He had gay friends.
yeah.
He had, a diverse sort of friend group that he moved
But
with.
he just wanted to succeed, and he said the party was the only option. And he says if I
Mhm.
had to do it again, I probably would do it again. And despite how guilty he feels, but he's able to get inside V's head and finds V's base, and V just knows he's coming, and V basically allows himself to get killed here, like in the sort of like Christ moment. I don't I don't disagree that V has to die. Like V has to die. Like that's naturally has got to happen
He
for the
well,
cycle. Why does he
because
need to
they're
die like this? I don't quite get it.
there are creators and there are destroyers. You're absolutely right. And his time as a destroyer is coming to an end,
And
but
he
there
goes to
always has to
literal
be.
Valhalla, yeah. But
Yeah,
why does Finch have to kill him here? That I don't quite get. Why is this his death? In the movie, his death is like it is like taking down the final minister. It's like a badass action scene. Um,
which is
and
cool.
it's cool. But in this, it's like him. He throws the knife at Finch, and Finch shoots him, and he's like,
Well,
"I got
because
you, you bastard. You're flesh and blood."
because the thing is, like, I mean, Finch is the one person from the beginning from the government who's really like, look, you're not dealing with a normal person here, right?
Mhm.
You're dealing with somebody who has superhuman knowledge and strength, and
My man gets
who,
driven to Jungian
yeah,
psychology to try and understand this case.
yeah, he's aware from the beginning that V is challenging the legal system, the justice system, such as it is in fascist Britain, in a way that not only do they not recognize, but in a way that they themselves created. So he's willing to admit where they are being caught completely with their pants down, and so in a way he's the one who sort of gets to. I mean, because um, V technically beats him in the fight, like he incapacitates him, but he ultimately carries the day.
Yeah. V it does say he's like I moved so slow he could have taken me down. And V is like I have a man to meet. Notably when V meets with him, he's like pretending to be a hobo playing money for cash on the
Mhm.
side of the subway, like just doing one last bit before he dies. He's gotta. Um
He says, "I'm waiting for the man," which is a
yeah.
Velvet Underground reference that I very much appreciated.
Yeah. And then at this point, the government is able to say the terrorist V is dead. He will not appear at midnight like he promised. And this is the point where Evie has to take up the mantle. She finishes things out by giving V his Viking funeral, sending him to Valhalla by putting him on a train, strapping it with bombs, and sending it to blow up the head, officially ending the Norse fire government. If there was any such thing. And then Evie appears and it's like the spirit of V lives on. You have to take, matters into your own hands now. Um, which is a more it offers Evie more agency, and she is V the creator now. She is a V who has not killed.
Mhm.
She is, and she says, I will not lead them, but I will help them. And as you said earlier, she takes on a new protege, a guy we haven't talked about much because he's honestly not that important. He's just kind of around. But but yeah, she brings oh my
Stone.
God, Stone in, yeah. Just one of the police officers. She brings him in, and he's gonna be, I guess, the new protege. And you have this final moment where these final moments where all the ministers go down to their own machinations.
Yes,
The
yes.
only two survivors of this kind of clash are Helen Hare and Finch.
Hmm.
Um, she notably, her own husband is bleeding out after like defending her honor or whatever, and she's like, "You're such a voyeur. Why don't you like to watch this?" She like puts a camera on him, makes him watch as he bleeds out.
Which
Um,
is cold, but I mean,
Cold
yeah,
as
it's
hell.
because
And
everything's gone up in smoke at that point. She's like,
yeah.
"You fucking bastard! I've done all this for I've done all this for us. I've maneuvered you into this position where I can be the woman behind the throne, and you've gone and gotten yourself killed because you stumbled across the fact that I was banging the Scotsman."
Yeah. And notably, oh, and we didn't say it, but Rose kills Adam Susan.
Yes, Rose
Yeah.
kills Adam. Yeah, Creedy lets her through like during the parade, and he's like, don't worry, she's high party.
It'll
It'll look
look
good.
good. Yeah. And then Rose caps him.
Hmm.
And you have this moment where he's like, "Who are you?" And it's like she's like, "My husband died for this man. I've met him a dozen times. He doesn't recognize my face."
Yeah.
And Rose takes her revenge, and she is the special Rose. I mean, I know we discussed it already, but it is a moment where Susan gets his final comeuppance. Um, and the finale is on Finch. This guy who's not been he's been a character that's honestly been used to exposit V's backstory for the most part, and be this guy that's just mystified by V, this guy that's like in Norse fire, but not of it. He does not espouse these ideals personally, but he has allowed himself to be carried around. And he can, to be clear, bears personal responsibility for its crimes. Um, and he is given the opportunity to join Helen Hare and this band of like rogues she's put together. And she's like, "We're going to put together an army, and we're going to reinstate. We're going to build a new order."
She
And
thinks
there's
she's put it together, like they're kind of passing her around, like in exchange for letting her eat.
Yeah, but like the implication though is he has this choice of like, do I return to building a gang as what Moore would call the biggest gang that then declares there is no anarchy? And he's like, no, go to hell. And she calls him a homo, and
I
and
fucking
he
love that.
and he walks off into the sunset, and it's
Like
like,
she's just alone with her fucking like homophobia and the
yeah.
and the
And her
ruffians.
guys, and so you end on, I mean, of course, a question mark. What does the future hold? Um,
Which
will they build a better world? Will Evie pull it off? Will the people reinstate a bad government? And then, will an endless string of V's knock down an endless string of fascists before they build a Kropotkian utopia? I don't know.
there's a couple of points I want to sort of untangle here.
Yeah.
The first being this is the bit that really right here at the end that really sort of tips me into the Finch as audience surrogate rather than Evie.
Okay.
I don't think anybody sees themselves I don't think anybody reading this sees themselves going through what Evie goes through and taking up V's mantle.
Sure.
I don't think anybody wants that for themselves. I don't think
Hmm.
anybody anticipates that for themselves because how the hell could you?
Yeah.
But what we have in Finch is, I mean, Moore said himself, he wanted to portray the fascists as, not cartoon Nazis, although there were certain, I mean, the Nazis themselves, IRL, had, cartoonishly evil
Yeah.
tendencies.
You have Adam Susan for that,
Yeah, you have Adam Susan for that,
and
IRL,
Creedy.
you had Goering and the weird shit that he got up to,
Yeah.
cosplaying at his hunting lodge and all. But Finch, he's the guy who joins because it's convenient, right? Because it's expedient in troubled time to go with the side that seems to be winning. And now and now there is no politics. There is no convenience. There is just an endless road that he can walk down, and whatever he comes to, he comes to.
Right. And in a way, one can, say, okay, so if you're the reader, you're presumably, an American or sitting in the UK. Yeah, this is more speaking to the reader. You are in some ways, in many ways, a potential Finch. You are someone who is part of the Order TM. You may or may not be a believer in it, but you are someone who facilitates it. Um, you are someone that V would say needs to be fired because
Hmm.
along with the whole of humanity. And if you had this possibility to build a new world, what would you do? And then also like how do we build this new world? And this is not really a book about how to pull off a revolution. It's not Alan Moore's guide. He has a little bit where he's like there can be a long silence, but the thunderclap is stronger yet.
Yes.
It's a cool it's like a cool bit. I'll read it about the people rising up. Noise is relative to the silence preceding it. The more absolute the hush, the more shocking the thunderclap. Our masters have not heard the people's voice for generations, Evie, and it is much louder than they care to remember. Like that goes hard, don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah.
But this is not Moore's theory for revolution. Moore probably, has his own series of theories. He exposits some of those in the interview I referenced. Um, however, this is, his concept of like, where does the individual fall in the revolution? What does an revolution look like? What does it look like in the sense of it's like moral character, it's destruction. V's funeral, the bomb that he's strapped to basically is seen as like he's like it's a farewell and it's a toast to the destroyers, he said. It's a toast to the bombers, a toast to the terrorists.
Hail and farewell in Latin, that's what he says.
Exactly. It is the revolutionary as a doomed man but then there must be a new type of revolutionary who builds. And I think you're right that Finch is that guy who has the potential to build and to destroy, and also the potential to just go starve in the wastelands.
Hmm.
Very possibly. Um, and it's left open for a reason. And I would have respected it a lot less if it said, and then they followed Bakuninist theory and built a commune. Like that would have been annoying and bad. Um,
Yeah, and the
which is
movie
why the ending
ends.
is so poignant.
And the movie, I mean, the movie ends notably on, I mean, and that's where the movie falls down ultimately, because I mean, the final set piece is, I still watch it back every now and then. It's fucking cool,
No, it
but
goes hard. Yeah.
yeah, but it ends on, a tribute to V himself, right, and the explosion,
Hmm.
and then nothing.
They destroy the parliament, which is the symbol of evil.
There
The
was the,
leaders
there
are
was the
dead.
there was the bad guy, and now there is not a bad guy, and presumably things will get better, and you need
Mhm.
that uncertainty.
And the movie ends on the note of V was my father and my mother and my whatever. And everyone takes off the mask and it's people who have died and people who haven't, right? That is not exactly what V is in the book. V is
No,
not everyone in the book. V is a very specific, like like V is the squad of people that George Jackson describes in the first four chapters of Blood in My Eye. Like
yes, yes.
like the people that it says like that no one will weep for and they will dance at their funerals and we will
Yeah.
remember them with honor. Like
Yeah, he is the one who points out very explosively, look, a 10-cent bullet can take down $1 million helicopter if you aim
yeah.
right.
And of course not to slap George Jackson with the label of anarchist. He would not appreciate that.
No,
Um,
no.
but I'm making my point about what V is. And therein lies the difference in, the movie and the book, which is worth elucidating. And ultimately, I walk away from this book like, first of all, just great read, really
Yes.
just tight prose, tight art, well done. Goes without saying, it's Alan Moore. He's incredibly talented. His quote unquote bad comics are considered much better than your average person.
Right.
Um, comic artists like just don't even like have the conversation. Like he's the goat. He's won greatest comic book artist of all time award three times from three different groups while living. That's insane. I walk away from it, with I don't know what I've learned. I confess. Um, I know I have this, impression of in this thought of, the idea of what horror arises from the contradictions and whose head that falls on. I know I have this, had this interesting interaction with these sort of complicated characters. I know that unfortunately it's not going to be this easy.
Hmm.
There's not going to be a guy, and there's
There will
not
be
going to,
contradictions. There will be
yeah,
vulnerabilities that take down one or another. That take down one or another formation.
yeah.
But
But
yeah, it's.
this will not, the apple will not
Hmm.
fall. You have to make it fall.
Hmm.
The apple of revolution, or
I'm
whatever
glad that you
Shakespeare.
brought up apples because at one point he says, "You asked for knowledge, Eve." He's comparing himself directly to the serpent. I just
Yeah,
found that funny.
yeah, exactly. Che Guevara. The revolution is not an apple that falls when it is ripe. You have to make it fall.
Yes.
Says. And that's the case. There is a need for organization. There is a need for, exploitation of crisis. Is this a a guidebook for how to make things better? No, not necessarily, but man, will it give you a lot to think about? Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely.
It still beggars belief to me, perhaps as I close this book, that there's nobody in the decade since the world ended who picked up socialism while they were memorizing Shakespeare. Like we don't see, as you said, the masses are not really the engine of. I mean, there is no revolution, there is no general insurrection in this book without the masses or in general, right? But it's not really about them. It's about the inciting incident that leads the contradictions to be irreconcilable, which, I mean, it's about fundamentally the fragility of any political project that attempts to endure indefinitely, right?
Yeah.
And without allowing for change.
But ultimately, in the V for Vendetta world, no matter what the news is saying, the Soviet Union is still around. I want to note the Soviet Union, they are saying, will there be another revolution in Russia? But it's not happened yet, despite the crop failures. Just want to note, maybe, maybe Creedy is migrating to the Soviet Union. It's possible. He's going to cross
Ah,
the nuclear, he's going to do Fallout in the Soviet Union. But
Comrade
they've still
Creedy.
got Comrade Creedy, indeed, Comrade Creedy. I've kind of said my final thoughts. My big takeaway from this book is just, man, the humanity in the Valerie bit, and how that rings through the whole thing, and the earnestness of that, and the love of that, and the ability of, like, trite as it is, for that inch of integrity and love and self-understanding to triumph over, call it evil, call it fascism, call it the cage, but the capacity of, that to transcend, um, is my ultimate final takeaway from this book. And, just to say again, the quote, "It is strange that my life should end in such a terrible place, but for 3 years I had roses and I apologized to nobody." Just it goes so hard and I love it so much. And that is what I think of the most from this book and from this work. And I will always appreciate Alan Moore for that, on a personal level. Um, Again, meaningful moment for me. And y'all, I guess appreciate the roses. Because that's also worth doing. Because we have times of roses, and we have times of cyanide pill communion wafers. Um, and the goal of any revolutionary, of any human, is to synthesize them both. And if somehow you can do that without permanently donning a Guy Fawkes mask, all power to you. Joss, any final thoughts?
Cyanide Roses. I really liked that third album of Bloody Gothic Rose 666.
Cyanide
I th
roses.
I th I think that's where Ebony really comes into her own as a contralto. She's exploring some interesting stuff vocally there.
Not as funny as I think it shouldn't be this funny to me.
Juxtaposed with, you're
Oh
stirring
my
paean to
God.
hope in the human spirit. Yeah, there's a bit of bathos in there, isn't there?
Guys, I wanted to say something about magic when we close. The snake god Glycon was famously worshipped in Rome as a puppet. It was a puppet snake. It was not actually a real serpent, and it was, understood broadly to be a hoax. People were mad about it when they found out about it. And that is the reason Alan Moore chose it as his god that he worships, the puppet god. And at the end of the day, I hope you'll realize that doesn't make any sense. You should worship the socialist shelf instead. Thank you. That's the end of the episode.